and lips that looked almost bee-stung in fullness, despite being pressed into a tight line. Her hair was thick and dark like her eyes, tumbling around her shoulders. She wore a plain white t-shirt over faded jeans, and Nate swallowed as his gaze took in the perfect curve of her breasts and hips. He promptly cursed himself for his line of thought. Here was a stranger at his front door, and he was ogling her like some sort of randy teenager instead of a grown man of 37. "Can I help you?" he asked, hoping he sounded more polite than lecherous. "Hi, Nate," she said softly. "How are you?"
Fine."
He took off his Stetson, slapping it against his thigh, and ran a hand through his hair with his other hand.
"Do I know you?"
The woman flashed a shy smile. "I'm Bianca Shaw, Eddie's sister. Don't you remember me?" Nate lifted one hand to grip the doorframe. Whether to steady himself or to keep himself from reaching for Bianca, he couldn't say. The beautiful woman in front of him was Eddie's little sister? "Busy bee," he murmured, repeating the nickname Eddie had used for his younger sister. She gave a short laugh. "I haven't had someone call me that since—" Her voice trailed off as her hands clenched in tight fists at her side.
"I'm sorry about Eddie,"
he offered, the words tasting like dust in his mouth.
"He died a hero."
Nate cleared his throat.
"If it helps."
"Thank you," she whispered, and swiped her fingers across her cheek. The familiar regret and blame churned through his stomach, turning the coffee he'd drunk to acid in his belly. Eddie Shaw had been like a brother to him. They'd met their first day of basic underwater demolition/SEAL training, more routinely known as buds. Although as a triplet, Nate had always been close to his brothers. He'd formed an immediate bond with the stocky, wisecracking soldier that was just as strong. From the few times he'd been to Eddie's mom's cramped apartment in San Antonio, he remembered Eddie's sister as a gangly teenager who giggled at everything and constantly tried to tag along with the brother who was 9 years older than her. Eddie had been infinitely patient with Bianca, and even when they were stationed overseas or on a ship, he'd always taken the time to answer her overly perfumed letters and all the silly questions she asked about life as a Navy SEAL.
"You're here in Paseo,"
he said, stating the obvious because his brain felt about 5 steps behind the reality of whatever was happening right now. "I'm here," she echoed, and bit down on her bottom lip, her gaze skittering away from his like she was nervous about something. "I hope I'm not bothering you." Nate had met people from all over the world and all different walks of life during his stint in the U.S. Navy. He'd become something of an expert on reading body language, and from the splotches of color blooming on Bianca's cheeks to the rigid set of her thin shoulders to the tiny breaths she blew out as if her lungs couldn't handle Paseo's clean air, Nate would have sworn on everything he had that the woman standing in front of him was in trouble. Eddie's sister was in trouble. The brother-in-arms whom Nate had failed to save during their last mission wouldn't have let that happen. Neither would Nate. All he had left of Eddie were memories and the guilt that burned his gut. But he could honor Eddie by taking care of Bianca. It was the only thing he had left to offer. He pushed aside his reaction to her, pretended he didn't feel attraction pulsing through him like a drumbeat, and tried to see her as the girl she'd once been, Eddie's baby sister. That was all she could ever be to Nate.
"What do you need, Bianca?"
he asked, wishing suddenly he was a different kind of man, one who could give her everything she wanted, and more. Bianca's breath whooshed out in a shuddery rush at Nathan Fortune's simple question. The summer she was 5 years old, new renters had moved into the tiny apartment next door to the cramped space where Bianca lived with her mom.